Hey everyone, Logan Hertz here with Hazeltine LLC. We're joined back again by our partner Brad Owens. We're going to talk about, health insurance, group benefits, things like that. Brad, how you doing?
You're doing great today. Good to
Good to
be here
see
with
you
you, Logan.
again. Good to see you again. So, one of the topics that I think we wanted to talk about today is how can we help someone who is a W-2 employee? So, if you're a business owner or if you're self-employed or things like that, we can certainly help you look at health insurance, health sharing, all the options that are out there. If you have benefits through an employer, we can take a look at it and you might as well send it to us and let us review it because my experience has been most people who have W-2 jobs, whether they're getting good benefits or not so good benefits, they've never really dug into what exactly do you have? How does it work? What are all the limitations? We can at least help you understand it a lot better than you probably do and help you understand other options. But I think the reason why I wanted to have this discussion with Brad is a lot of W-2 employees feel like, well, I get that through my employer. I don't need, I'm done. And we wanted to talk through why we can still help you, why you still might want to consider some other options, which might not necessarily replace anything that your employer is giving you. It could be a supplement and how we can help you. So with that said, let me turn it over to Brad and say, Brad, let's say I'm a W-2 employee and you come and say, "Hey, I can help you out with some health insurance or other benefits." And I say, "Yeah, I'm covered. My employer takes care of that." Your response would be,
A response would be it never hurts to do the old double check there and take a look. The reason why health plans, if you've been on a group employer plan for some part of your life, if you're old enough to have any gray hair, you'll notice a trend that happens, and that is they get worse and more expensive every single year. And sometimes you'll get lucky and they'll stay the same for 1 year, but that's not going to typically be the case 2 years in a row. So benefits, the structure of the insurance is getting more leaned out and the cost is typically rising. And especially if you have a family on the plan, that could be a situation where the escalation in cost can happen pretty quickly because it is up to the employer to determine. They're under no legal obligation to help with the cost of covering your family. So typically, if I'm talking to somebody that has family coverage, I will for sure be doing a review to make sure that their coverage is it meets affordability. And what do I mean by affordability? So the Affordable Care Act, one of the things it did is it created an employer mandate that said employers of a certain size, 50 or more employees, that you're required to offer affordable coverage to your employees. Nowhere in it does it mention affordable coverage to family members. And affordable is 9% in 2025. So looking at that affordability would be step one. And my mind always goes to the financial side of things. But there is a qualitative issue that I think sausage makers such as myself, we get to see how all the back office nonsense works with health insurance. It's fundamentally, Logan and I, we don't miss a chance to talk about how busted the system is, how terrible it is, and how it's unsustainable long term. So when we look at a plan for your family that you're currently on, and we run it through affordability testing, that's really to make sure that it is affordable for your family. I can't tell you how many times I've seen families pay more for their health insurance through an employer plan than they pay for their mortgage. In fact, it's probably common. I've not seen any hard numbers on it, but I suspect that a good share of the population that's true. So that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. The IRS fixed a loophole in the system back in 2022. It's called the family glitch. Won't bore you with the specifics, but the bottom line of it is now the affordability is tied to household income. And regardless of whether you're being offered coverage through your workplace, your spouse's workplace, there is affordability criteria there that supersedes what you're being offered at work. And so that not only allows you to look at other options, you're always allowed to do that, but It could mean subsidized coverage, less expensive coverage for your family. Now, that's the family situation. The individual situation's a little more nuanced. So we're going to start and base an assumption here that the group plan, your employer plan for an individual is affordable. We're going to say, yep, it work for a big company. We know that's going to be affordable. So if it's affordable, we're going to look at the qualitative pieces of it. And even at the end of the conversation, Logan, where you look at it, this is a fantastic plan that costs you almost nothing. You're in great spot. Do you understand how to use this plan effectively? Especially if it's a high deductible health plan. I can't tell you how many times I've seen employers groups roll out these high deductible health plans that are a fantastic opportunity for people to plan for their future and give so little education about it. People are so lost and don't even take the number one step of creating a health savings account. And to that point, if you have a plan that you're paying for, even if it's not very much, to get the most value out of it, you got to understand it. And that's one of the steps that we're willing to take. We know that if we talk to a handful of people, there will be needs and places where we can help, but we can typically help everybody understand their plan better.
Yeah, that's a great point because so many people do not understand what they have. So even if what you have is great, let us help you understand it. And we're not talking about just health insurance here. We're talking about your whole group benefits package. You might have a group disability policy. You might have a group critical illness policy. You might have life insurance. You might have long term care insurance. We can take a look at all of that and help you understand what you have and how best to leverage it. Like you mentioned, if you have a high deductible plan, you can set up a health savings account. Whether your employer does that for you or not, you can do it on your own. You're eligible. And I want to mention a few. I've seen at least three concrete examples where we were able to help people in various ways. One example was a guy who had some health issues and he had pretty good health insurance options through his employer. And since he had some health issues, he knew he's going to have a certain amount of recurring healthcare expenses. And so Brad helped him to understand. So normally the instinct is, well, I'll just take the richest plan that my employer offers because I know I'm going to use it. And what Brad helped him to understand is actually it's more cost effective if you choose the lean option, choose the lower cost option from your employer that provides less coverage, and then supplement that with an individual plan that you buy on your own. You actually end up with a more cost effective solution overall. And the reason is because those very rich plans, everybody knows the people who are most likely to sign up for those are the people who are the least healthy. And so that's priced in. Whereas if you take a leaner plan and then supplement it with something that's not as much priced in. So we got him a more cost effective solution. So if you're coming up on when you're making your benefit selection, come talk to us so we can help you make the best selection because oftentimes your employer will give you multiple options. Disability coverage is another one. Many employers will offer voluntary disability coverage where you can sign up for it. And of course, that is a good thing. The challenge with the disability policy through your employer is that you do not own that policy. Okay. So obviously, it's a good thing. If your employer provides you disability, that's obviously a good thing. And I think you should seriously consider taking advantage of it. But you should contrast it with what an individually owned policy would look like. Because the main problem with a disability policy through your employer is that you don't own the policy. So your options are limited. You don't get to pick the one that's most suited to you. And then it doesn't go with you. So when you leave that employer or when that employer decides to stop offering it because they're under no obligation to keep offering it, right? And you can do a search on a lot of the lawsuits that have cropped up around group policies because to Brad's point, a lot of people sign up for their group disability policy and they just think I'm covered. And they have no idea the terms and conditions, the limitations, the exclusions, because they're always going to be there. And then when they file a claim, they find out their condition is specifically excluded or they're only covered for 2 years and then you're on your own. Things like that, that we can help you understand in advance. And again, the biggest problem with a group policy, which again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, just understand What it means is you are not protecting your insurability. So if you become unhealthy or uninsurable at some point in the future, you're no longer eligible to take out a disability policy. So I had a client who was offered a pretty good group policy through work. And after I explained to him the options, he decided to instead turn that down and take out an individually owned policy that he's paying for out of pocket because this is a non-cancelable policy, which means not only can he keep it in force for all of his working life, no matter what happens to his health, he can add coverage at specific intervals. So as his income goes up, he can add more coverage without underwriting. So he now has guaranteed disability coverage from now until age 67, and he can even extend it to age 75. It'll be more limited coverage. When you think about it, that's phenomenal. If you take the employer plan, the problem is what if something happens to your health where now the employer stops offering the disability coverage, or now you're on your own and you're a business owner or what have you, and now you can no longer get coverage. Or maybe it's just super expensive because you had a bout with cancer or some kind of injury or type 2 diabetes or any number of things. So that's something to consider. Another guy that we helped, we moved him from health insurance. So he was with a small employer and he had health insurance, but it was more cost effective to move him to a health sharing plan with CrowdHealth. So we moved him away from his health insurance through the law firm that he was working with. He was a partner there, and we moved him and his family to health sharing, and it saved him thousands of dollars. He was married with 3 children. We saved him thousands of dollars and got him better coverage by moving him to health share, right? So the important thing to understand about a group policy is that while it can be great, it does not protect your insurability. So even if you're getting great coverage, you really should consider something that you individually own that protects your insurability. Okay. So that can be a reason for, as an example, even if you have health insurance through your employer, to get a health sharing plan. Because one of the reasons why health sharing is so affordable is because there are a lot of limitations on pre existing conditions. So you want to make sure you get that before you develop any pre existing conditions. And then those will be funded if you do have them further down the road. Right. And one of the points that Brad made when we were talking off camera, which I thought was such a phenomenal point, is that you view this, if you have great health insurance through your employer, that's unequivocally a good thing. I'm not saying it's not. However, it is kind of keeping you trapped. A lot of people stay with jobs they don't like and they feel trapped with their employer because they just feel like, what am I going to do with health insurance if I go elsewhere? And so that Cadillac health insurance plan can be kind of a trap where now you feel like you cannot go anywhere else. You cannot strike out on your own. You can't do it because you need this coverage. Well, we can help you understand there might actually be some good options out there, and you can start that preparation years in advance where you start a health sharing plan. So you have health insurance through your employer and you have a health sharing plan. So you get through those pre-existing condition limitations, which might be for 2 years. So
We typically talk.
I know I rambled on a lot there, but I just want to point out that I gave at least 3 concrete examples of where we have helped people who had good group benefits through their employer, where we helped them optimize it or replace it or supplement it with something else to end up with a better overall solution. So at least let us take a look at what you have. We can at least help you understand what you have and all the limitations around it.
Yeah, fantastic points there. And I'll just to sort of put it in a different perspective. We tend to think of an entrepreneur. If you say entrepreneur, what comes to mind? You think of somebody that's like 20s, 30s, wildcatting it, going out on their own, dropping out of Harvard, starting a tech firm, whatever the case is. And ironically, the entrepreneurs that have the lowest failure rates are entrepreneurs in their 50s. Now, that doesn't get talked about enough because we always want to think about talent in terms of being a prodigy where it happens young. And I think the truth of the matter is there's several reasons why entrepreneurship skews younger. Maybe they don't have families. Maybe the risk appetite's higher. One of the things that never gets talked about is there are a great many people that have fantastic ideas and have the pathway to their better life laid out right in front of them. And they are just stuck because they have maybe a health issue. What am I going to do? You leave a company, you've got all the funds you need to buy the equipment or start your business, and you've got all the know how, everything. But then you look at, well, if I've got this condition and I leave, can I be insured or do I have to take Cobra that's going to be $3,000 a month for my family? All these things come into play and are very limiting to having a good life, to living your truest and highest potential. And when I talk to employers about their goals with having health plans, the most frequent responses are compliance with the law. They don't want to get penalties, so they're going to do that. Attracting and retaining talent. That's one of the high things. So attracting talent totally makes sense. You want to have a good benefits program to make sure people want to come work for you. But the retention part, sure, there's mainly the competition with other employers there for the retention, but not zero amounts of that is to have people handcuffed and to make them really strongly consider going off on their own. One of the things that probably should be talked about more is productivity, and it just doesn't. That instead of health insurance, promoting health. And so with that in mind, there are strategies if you are a person who maybe you don't have a fully baked idea ready to go, that you're ready to set off on and burn your own path, but maybe it's not down the road. Maybe it's something you would like to have the ability to do in the next 24 months. That is definitely an area where we can help prepare you for that next big step, and doing so in a way that'll make sure that you're not crushed under the weight of Cobra premiums.
That's exactly right. I think there are people who have full-time gigs, but they have aspirations for being an entrepreneur or maybe just starting a side gig. But they're worried about, well, I got 4 children, we have these health issues, how are we gonna deal with that without this employer-provided health insurance? We can have a conversation, help you lay out a path to, over the next 2 years or so, get you in a position where you can then leave your employer and not be destroyed by healthcare costs and not have a lot of risk. So we can help you escape those golden handcuffs. So I know I mentioned some specific examples. Brad, do you have specific examples or specific insights where someone who has employer provided benefits where you could actually help them improve or optimize their situation?
Oh, sure. So the number one thing is the family glitch, where if you have dependents on the plan and there's a big shift in your cost, because the company is reprioritized, reallocated investment in those programs away from covering dependents or towards covering the employees. You think about, there's plenty of years where group health plans get 20% increases. And you're talking about on a spend of, even modest sized groups, that's $1 million of spend, and then 20% on top of it, 200,000. Well, the businesses have to make business decisions. And if that business decision is to keep our plan solvent, we've got to reduce what we're contributing to the cost of family coverage, they'll do it. And so those things can happen very quickly. And it's important to have, even if it's not happening to you now, if you've got your family on a group health plan, you're running up against it every year, you know, so that may happen. So, one other example that I'll mention, the supplemental gap plans, as Logan was talking about helping folks, I've seen so many of my clients that came to me and didn't think there was much that I could do for them because they were in a group health plan. And we looked at it, and it was like, if you buy up to the, you know, high end plan, then you're getting killed, because the adverse selection, which Logan mentioned, where sicker people take the better plans, makes those plans prohibitively expensive. Whereas if you just want a higher quality of coverage, we can typically do that through a supplement plan or a gap plan of some sort. And that extends to even if you've got a high deductible health plan. There's nothing that says you can't have a supplemental plan alongside that. Because, for instance, I have a high deductible health plan and it's $6,000 is the deductible. So if I'm a young person that doesn't have a fully formed HSA or starting that process, getting to the point to where it's not going to create a financial burden should I need to fully use that insurance. Let's take the case of I'm young and healthy and don't have much saved and think, oh, it'll be fine. Anybody at any time can have appendicitis. And a case of appendicitis, there you go. You know, if you've got a six or $7,000 high deductible health plan, you could be asked to pony that up as they're wheeling you out of the hospital after your surgery. Those things can happen to anybody. So the supplemental plans, really help take the sting off that until such time. They don't have to be forever. That's a really good method to do it because the supplemental plans, because they're taking on a finite risk, are more efficient. I always tell people the reason why health insurance is so difficult, it's almost impossible to price because the upper limit of what an insurer could have to pay is infinite. So your portion that you pay, and I see it all the time, where you have one person, and this is typically how health insurance goes, where you have a group of 100 people, and one person eats up the claims, eats up everything that everybody else paid into because the cost of certain conditions and medications and all that can be extraordinary. And for that reason, if a group health insurer is, or kind of the back end of that, if they're having to write the unknown and they're going to take a lot of room for safety there. And the big United Healthcares of the world and Cignas, they don't lose money. And that's sort of the important feature of them. And so they take such a conservative stance that the cost gets higher and higher and higher every year. Whereas the supplemental writer, they know that for Brad or for Logan, they've got this amount of risk. They've got $5,000 worth of risk. And so if you know you've got that amount of risk, it's much, much easier to model. It's much, much easier to price that infinite risk.
Absolutely. And so when we talk about this, we're not talking about just health insurance, but we're talking about group benefits more generally. So it's not just health insurance, it's also can you use health sharing, health savings account, disability policy, critical illness policy, long term care policy, life insurance. Some of these employers offer things like estate planning, employee wellness programs, employee assistance programs, health advocacy. All those things we can help you to understand and at least take full advantage of whatever you're getting from your employer. Because I think a lot of people are not taking full advantage of what you're getting from your employer. Help you to understand the universe of what's available to you because there are probably plans and benefits that you're not aware of out there. Uh, like with a lot of these critical illness and disability plans, to your point, Brad, it's much easier for the insurance company to price them because there's a set dollar amount, which can go up over time. But in every given year, every given period, there's a set dollar amount. The insurance company knows what their exposure is. So it's much easier price. And then from the perspective of the insured, it's a much better process because the claims process is very simple and straightforward. You signed up for this amount, here it is. So a disability policy isn't going to cover your cancer treatment. Your health insurance will do that. But what it'll do is it'll replace your income if you're unable to work. And so you know what your income is, and they replace a certain percentage of that while you're unable to work. Critical illness policies, oftentimes it's a lump sum and there's no questions asked. It's very easy. You had a heart attack, here's $50,000. That's what you signed up for. And so it can be a great supplement where now you feel like you have options. Because I think even people who have health insurance, when they have some sort of negative health event, the financial aspect is what's top of mind because they're already self-limiting their options like, oh no, what is this going to cost? How am I going to pay for this? If you have a supplemental critical illness policy where you get a lump sum $50,000, now you can walk in feeling more confident that I can choose the treatment and the doctor that's going to be best for me. I'm not as worried about what's this going to cost.
Yeah, and to that point too, it's not strictly about paying a critical illness policy. A lot of people think of it in terms of, okay, I've got to be able to cover the costs that are associated with my care. And oftentimes that's the easy part. That's the one that's straightforward and expensive, but not like shattering. Where it gets shattering and why you need a critical illness policy or why one would be very helpful in with cancer diagnosis is if the amount's $50,000, okay, that sounds like if I've got a $5,000 deductible and it's going to cover all of that. So the other $45,000, whatever, what's that intended for? Well, when you, let's say you have a cancer diagnosis and you have to go get treatment at MD Anderson in Texas. And to do so, you have to exhaust all your vacation and also go on FMLA. And oh, by the way, you're in such poor health that your spouse has to do the exact same thing. And you as a household have zero income coming in during the course of that treatment. Now, FMLA, the way it works, not every employer is required to do it, only employers of certain size. But let's assume that you work for an employer that's subject to FMLA. You get 12 weeks where your job is held for you, but they don't pay you during that time. And so I've seen so many cases where that really bailed out families that were going through a tough time like that and battling cancer. And it'll allow them to focus on that battle, not the subsequent battles of we don't have any income coming in. We're going to deplete whatever savings we have and go into hawk. And potentially, if this becomes a longer lasting situation, are we properly positioned to where this won't harm our family long term?
Right. There are so many non-medical expenses that people don't think about when you have a health issue like that, whether it be travel, whether it be food, whether it be modifications to your house, whatever. There are so many other expenses that get incurred that obviously health insurance is not going to cover. They're not going to pay for your travel so you can go meet with a specialist, go meet with the best doctor, go travel to get a surgery done. They're not going to pay for that. They're not going to pay for your spouse to take time off so that they can take care of you. They're not going to pay for your children to be taken care of while you're going and getting treatment and they need to be taken care of. All those things that come up. And I believe in defense in depth, meaning each of these policies has its place. Your health insurance plan is intended to cover your direct healthcare costs. And even then, there could be challenges where we all know people who have had to fight to get things covered. But then if you get some kind of a critical illness diagnosis, your employer provided health insurance will only last as long as you're an employee of that company. What if you have to leave because of it? So the critical illness policy provides you with a lump sum benefit. What if you're unable to work because of the critical illness? Most disability claims are not due to injury, they're due to illness. Maybe you get cancer and maybe you recover, but you're unable to work for a significant period of time, 6 months to 2 years. A disability policy will replace your income, at least a significant portion of it, while you're unable to work. And to your point, Brad, it allows you to focus on what you should be focusing on, which is getting better. A lot of people will go back to work prematurely because they don't have a choice. They have this cancer diagnosis. In theory, they probably could work, but they probably shouldn't be, right? And they'll go back and work because they need the income. Whereas if you have a disability policy, you have the peace of mind to know, okay, I can take as much time as I need to actually get better and then go back to work. And I'm not worried about my income. Then you can have
And I've got an interesting story right on that. When I was fresh out of college, I worked at a job for a large company, but there was a fellow that worked there that had a heart attack and he did not have a critical illness policy. He was going, and the company had fantastic insurance. So his medical costs were not the issue. Recovery and being able to properly recover was the issue. And so he rushed back to work. Guess what happened? He had a subsequent another heart attack, and he did it again. Finally, they put him in a different place and to not a job that was less strenuous, and he had another heart attack on the job, and so that ended up where he had to retire, and I think his family suffered greatly because of it. super nice guy, had no intentions, and one of the hardest working people I've ever met. Had no intentions of that happening, but that's why you have insurance because you none of us can predict the future.
Yeah. And the other piece of this is potentially having a whole life insurance policy, which can cover you for long term care needs. So as you age, as you reach retirement, um, Medicare and Medicaid are not going to cover a lot of the expenses that are incurred as a part of long term care. And so if you have a whole life insurance policy, it can be designed a lot of different ways, but that death benefit can be advanced to you should you have some form of long-term care need. And similar to the critical illness, there are all kinds of non-medical expenses related to if you have a long-term care need, which doesn't even necessarily mean you entering a nursing home. It's just a natural part of the aging process. After the age of 65, if you're married, the chances of you or your spouse having a long-term care need is 70% in retirement. So a 70% chance you're going to have some form of long-term care need. You could have a long-term care insurance policy. Those are great. You can have one of those. I like the whole life insurance policies because it's more flexible in terms of how you can use it. Um, and if you don't use it, then that money just stays with the death benefit, and you don't lose the money if you don't use it. And so it's indemnity based, meaning similar to the critical illness policy. Once you have a long-term care need, you can use that death benefit however you want, right? You don't have to use it on medical. It doesn't matter. You get the money. Of course, it's tax free because it's an insurance claim. It's not you realizing a gain. This is why you shouldn't be using, as an example, your retirement accounts or money in the market to pay for long-term care needs. Because the problem is once you start selling those assets, now you have to pay taxes on those gains. This is tax-free and it's guaranteed. So you can spend that money on whatever you need. It doesn't have to be healthcare related. It could be anything. And in I think two-thirds of long-term care claims, the insured is still living at home, which is what you want, of course. In general, you want to keep the insured living at home if you can, and this would provide you the means to do so. So if you need to modify your house, install an elevator, install some support bars in the shower, whatever you need to do, pay for a live-in nurse or a nurse to visit you periodically. You can now pay for all that so that you don't have to go into a facility and you can continue to live at home and you don't become a burden to your children. And then, of course, eventually you die and now your whole life insurance policy pays out that death benefit. So at every point in time throughout there, you are covered. You have your health insurance to cover your health sharing plan to cover your direct healthcare related expenses. You have a critical illness policy or some sort of indemnity based policy that gives you a lump sum of cash should you have a negative health event to pay for healthcare, but also non healthcare related expenses. And just to give you the peace of mind to know you can get the treatment that you need and you're not worried about what it costs. You have the disability policy to replace your income while you might be unable to work and getting treatment. Should it result in a long term care need, you have, of course, the whole life insurance policy protecting you with a death benefit, not to mention the cash value, which you can use. And then when you eventually do die, it's a whole life insurance policy. So it never expires. That means that death benefit will be paid. It'll cover the funeral costs, it'll cover final expenses, it'll cover estate planning, plus leave a nice tax free legacy to your children, to your grandchildren, to a charity, to a trust, whatever you care about. Offense wins games, defense wins championships. Everyone in the financial sector loves to talk about the offense because that's super excited. But you know what? That's not how people get rich. Okay. Unless you're an entrepreneur or a real estate investor, that's typically it's not the offense that makes you rich. It's the defense, which people don't like to talk about, but it's the $50,000 cost that you avoided because you had the right insurance. It's a $100,000 hole in your retirement plan that you avoided because you could use your whole life insurance policy to cover long-term care. That's what really matters. It's the market crash that you're not worried about because you have guaranteed assets and whole life insurance. But when you play defense, you have to play defense as a team. There's no one magic asset or magic insurance policy that's going to protect you, cover you against everything. It's where you can work with someone like Brad and myself to make sure we coordinate all these things together. And it's not challenging, it's not complicated. It just takes a little bit of thought. But I think the temptation is for people to put a check in the box. Yep, my employer provides me with health insurance. I'm covered. Well, let's talk through that a little bit, understand what the limitations are. And you might be surprised that to find that it's fairly cost effective to get you a significantly better protection overall.
Yeah, and I think you know, people don't necessarily love these topics because they, you know, bring to mind, have to think about, okay, a bunch of what ifs that are not really that pleasant. And the most unpleasant what if is, what if I do nothing? And what if I just allow my future to be determined by luck? You don't want to be luck dependent. And I love your analogy of defense wins championships, because you don't have to be the smartest or most talented or gifted. We live in a fantastic country because everybody has an opportunity, regardless of how naturally talented you are, to work hard and do the right things and play some defense and be relatively assured that you're gonna have a stable existence, and your children and your family will not necessarily be on the hook for some of those things. I don't know of a family out there, and if it happens to be your family that has never had one of these issues, please let me know and I'll pray for you, because you've been running good. But I can't tell you how many families, my own personal family was touched by this, by long-term care needs. I'll tell you this, my grandmother lived to be 101 years old. And she was a wonderful, wonderful woman. And her mind was always perfect. But you get to a certain age and your body is just not there anymore. And so for the last 13 years of her life, she had 24-hour round the clock people, caretakers in her home. And I'd love to tell you that my grandfather and our family did the right thing and had all that accounted for. We did not. And so we definitely wanted to spend every moment we could with her, but it certainly was a significant financial headwind for our family. 13 years of caretaking. And so doesn't have to be like that. Life should be a blessing and not a burden.
As Tom Hegna says, if you do not have a long-term care plan, you do not have a retirement plan. It's as simple as that. And I believe the best way to, there are multiple ways. It's not the only way, just to be clear, but I believe for most people, the best way to approach long-term care is to start contributing to a whole life insurance policy where that death benefit can be utilized for long-term care needs. And so with a whole life insurance policy, one of the benefits is that it's not use it or lose it. So as you pay premiums in your whole life insurance policy, you're growing cash value, which is like a savings account. It's liquid. You can use it however you want. If you have a long-term care need, then you can start pulling from the death benefit to pay for that long-term care need. But if you never have a long-term care need, then the death benefit goes to your family. So you don't lose anything. Nothing ever goes away in that plan. Um, it's not necessarily a replacement for a long-term care insurance policy. I will throw that caveat out there. Obviously, you can get more robust coverage if you go for a pure long-term care insurance policy. And the best ones, in my opinion, are actually what they call hybrid policies, which is when you have a whole life insurance policy with a true long-term care rider. And the reasons why those are the best now is because, to your point about not knowing how to price things, the old long-term care insurance policies don't exist anymore. They got blown out of the water by Alzheimer's and other things like that. The costs were just too extreme. But the insurance companies know how to price whole life insurance. That is an actuarially sound business model that's been around for 200 years. And so they know how to price that. And so when they stack a long term care rider on top of it, where you're advancing yourself that death benefit, they already underwrote you for the death benefit and they know how to underwrite that. Right. So it's an actuarially sound business model from both the perspective of the insured and the insurance company. And then there are also some annuities-based solutions as well. So there are options. So notice when Tom Agnes says he said long-term care plan, he didn't necessarily say long-term care insurance. You can have that. That is a possibility, but there are multiple ways of addressing it. But do not self-insure. There is no such thing as self-insurance. Okay. Wealthy people don't self-insure. Okay. Self-insure is just a fancy word for uninsured. It's just saying, I have no plan. I don't want to think about it. So I'm going to use this term of saying, oh, I'm self-insured, right? Come on.
Well, the irony of
That's just
that,
being irresponsible is what it is. Yeah.
well, it's funny, the irony of this, Logan, based on our conversation, kind of had me think about it. And the wealthier end of the spectrum, when it comes to my client base, those are the ones that are really intently worried about long-term care and are more proactive in getting those policies. And that's counterintuitive because those are the people that would be most able to self-insure $10,000 a month for memory care at a facility for 5+ years. However, I think since most everyone's been touched by it, they could see a lot of their life's work. They want to, as you mentioned, a trust or their children or charity or whatever they decide to do, the accumulation of their life's work, just go out the window and in one of the saddest ways possible. And that's a tough situation. I've seen the decision be made where families ran out of money and they had to go from a facility that was not the Ritz Carlton, but a nice facility to a Medicaid facility because they literally ran out of every bit of money that was intended. And a lot of times with that, you have a spouse that is now left for the rest of their lives with almost nothing. That is totally indigent. And not to be all grapes of wrath about it, but
Well,
it is.
the good news is with a little bit of planning, that sort of situation can be avoided. But again, the odds are 70%.
Yeah.
70%, right? If you have a term life insurance policy, the odds of you filing a claim while that term is still in force is 2%. There's only a 2% chance of you dying, but you're still going to have life insurance because it'd be catastrophic if, God forbid, you died. So that makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, so shouldn't you do some planning around something where there's a 70% chance that it's going to happen to you? And the reason why those people are wealthy, Brad, is because they think this way. They're optimizing their finances. They're thinking in terms of defense, not offense. That's why they're wealthy. They focus on defense and protection of their assets, and that's how they get wealthy. So they avoid these potentially ruinous things. So when you're getting late in life, you could potentially have a really big financial burden right at the end of your life that you didn't plan for, unless you have, say, a whole life insurance policy or something like that in place. Annuities can help too, where you have a guaranteed lifetime income stream. So you're guaranteed to never run out of money. The good news is this is not too challenging if you're willing to sit down and do a little bit of planning with someone like myself who knows how to plan for these things. It's not that challenging. It will take some money, of course. It's not going to be free, but it'd be better to, as they say, when it comes to like car maintenance or anything else, those relatively small amounts of money you spend today are the large amounts of money you don't spend tomorrow. It's simple as that. And the reason why wealthy people don't self-insure is because anyone who's actually done the analysis knows it's far less efficient to self-insure than it is to actually buy an insurance policy. That's what they're built for, or have some other financial instrument that's designed for that is always going to be more efficient. Self-insuring only makes sense if you're talking about like a deductible. So I'll pick my deductible level. Maybe it's $5,000. I can self-insure $5,000. That's reasonable. But I don't even like using that phrase because if you really take the logic of self-insuring to its conclusion, you should never have any insurance, Brad. You should never have any insurance. Don't have any insurance. Take the money that you were contributing to insurance and put it somewhere else in a savings account, build up a pool of capital. And then if something does happen, you'll be self insured, Brad. See?
Well, the whole uh, thought process behind that is, you know, let's say everyone self-insured and we had a group of, just for simplicity's sake, 100 people. It would be like, you know, we don't have a police department and we get to save all this money on property taxes because we don't have a police department. But every year, one of us gets murdered out of the 100. If you're trying to self-insure certain things, like if you don't have medical insurance, you get long-term care insurance, you don't have disability insurance. These are lights out kind of events. On the medical side, that can be bankruptcy, even for people with pretty solid needs. I'm pretty confident Well, Warren Buffett's old enough now that he's on Medicare, but I'm sure he's on Medicare. I'm sure he's not taking it upon himself to self-insure that because the risk. And in fact, it's funny. I just recently had a talk with a CEO of a group that is fairly large. So they're large enough that they can self-insure as a group. And it has a much different meaning when you're talking about self-insuring on a group plan because you have a whole lot of risk to spread. When you have just one individual, it's binary. You flip a coin, like that movie No Country for Old Men. You flip a coin, and if it's heads, you live, and if it's tails, you don't. But in any event, that he looked at it and we decided since you own the company, it's fairly indefensible that you wouldn't shift that risk to another plan given your age and where you are, because you're now bearing the entire risk of that. And this person happened to be eligible for Medicare. So that made just a ton more sense to shift that onto a bigger party. But yeah, the self insuring for an individual is a really, really dangerous and tough gamble. Uh,
Yeah, usually they're just saying, "I just don't wanna think about it. I'm not gonna be responsible, and so I'm gonna use this ridiculous term of self-insuring to absolve myself of the responsibility to actually think through these things." I've never met anyone of any means who actually did some analysis and concluded that self-insuring for anything other than maybe a deductible, reasonable amount, made any
mhm.
financial sense whatsoever, right? Again, if you really take that to its logical conclusion, you should never have any insurance. Just self-insure everything and pile up a bunch of money, and then if something does happen, hey, you'll have this pile of money you can draw from. Obviously, that doesn't make any sense. There's way, way, way too much risk in it. You're gonna have life insurance that if you have just a term policy, which I like convertible term that you then convert the whole life, there's less than a 2% chance you're gonna use that. But you still have it because you know it would be absolutely catastrophic if something did happen. And then of course there's the huge, which we haven't even talked about. This could be a whole episode on its own. The huge, enormous psychological benefit of having these plans in place so you don't have to worry about it. That can really eat you up when you have to worry about these things. Or to your point, if something does happen and you're worried about paying for it, because that's going to be top of mind. I can speak from experience. The finances are going to be top of mind. Just like how many divorces happen because of finances. It's not necessarily money is the problem, but it's the catalyst because you cannot ignore it. It's reality. You cannot ignore it. It'd be nice if you could just get whatever healthcare treatment you wanted whenever you wanted, but that's just not reality. So we covered a lot there, Brad. Anything you want to say in closing on how we can help people who do have some group provided benefits?
Yeah, I think just talking to us, we're make it as easy as possible. We're not going to make you learn a whole bunch of things. We're going to give you the information in a digestible format. We're going to give you situations that things to think about that maybe you haven't thought about before. And ultimately, we're not in the options business. We're in the advice business. And so we're going to tell you what we think we would do in your situation if it was us and our families affected.
Well, thanks so much for your time, Brad. We would appreciate it. If you want to learn a little bit more, discuss some options, come talk to us. We'd be happy to share some insights with you and see if we can help you. Thanks a lot, Brad. Greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, Logan.